There's many voices today that say we shouldn't talk about our current culture, that we're being political. I disagree completely. I have a passing interest in politics because I believe politics in our culture is a reflection of the heart of the nation. In the same way, if you're in the hospital, they're going to take your vital signs on a regular basis. They'll check your blood pressure and your pulse and your oxygen levels. They want to know your health. And if they're paying very close attention, they'll do blood screens. Well, I believe elections are like taking the vital signs of the spiritual vitality of a nation, in the one we have. We have a representative form of government. We have elections, and we vote against the sanctity of human life, and we vote against biblical views of marriage, and we vote against all sorts of biblical principles and values. It's not a political problem, it's a church problem. And then we compound that by saying, well, we maybe shouldn't talk about those things. Folks, it's who we are. The difference in applied science and theoretical science is engaging people. Now, science theory is important because it ultimately gets played out in the practice of medicine. But if we never take it out of the laboratory, it doesn't help the people. The same thing is true of theology. If we gather in our churches and we have debates about the nuances of theology, but we don't take that into our culture, we are robbed of the transforming power of the gospel. Now, I understand it brings confusion and even division. Jesus said that. He said, I didn't come to bring unity or peace. I came to bring division. And the goal isn't to be divisive. The goal is to know the truth, a biblical perspective, and then encourage people to bring alignment in their lives with that. So when we talk about a life that triumphs over evil, it's about a biblical worldview. But to do that, we have to understand what's happening in our culture. I came across a quote. It's not a new one. It's from a Lutheran pastor, a German pastor, Martin Niemöller. I suspect many of you have heard it. He wrote this: first they came for the socialist, and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionist, but I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, but I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. The backstory makes a great deal of difference. That's not just a witty quote. As I said, Martin Niemöller was a Lutheran pastor in Germany. In the 20s and 30s, he was a very vocal sympathizer with Nazi ideas. He thought that nationalism was an appropriate response to the humiliation of what followed World War I. When Hitler came to power, Niemöller became a very outspoken critic because he saw the interference in the church from the Nazis. You should know he spent the last 8 years of Nazi rule in prisons and concentration camps. You see, there was a point in time where the church's response could have changed the outcome of history. It could have changed the destiny of the West. But it was either inconvenient, or the price seemed too high, or everyone was distracted. It was true amongst the Christian community. It was true amongst the Jewish community. I don't know that they would have changed the outcome, but they could have certainly changed their destiny. I've listened to interview after interview after interview with Jews from the European community who said, we never imagined the hatred would come for us. We were the presidents of banks. We were in charge of universities. Our families had been a part of the culture for hundreds of years. And you still hear the shock in their voices where they say, until that late at night when they knocked on our door and they took us away. When the church fails, people suffer. Well, you and I are witnesses to a conflict of biblical significance. It would fit right into the book of Judges when the people lost their way and God handed them over to a series of judgments. We see them all around us. If we just remember quickly, and I don't want to stand here long because I do want to get to the biblical response, but our experiences together from the last 4 years have been very insightful and very different than any previous experiences we've had. We faced a pandemic of unknown origins. China, the country where it originated, hid the facts from the world, denied it, did their best to cover it up, and never suffered any true consequences for the devastation they unleashed. Our churches, on the heels of that, were told to close, and we complied almost universally. We lost sight of a fundamental component of the people of God, and that's that in the face of great suffering, our assignment as God's people is to serve the suffering. Our schools were closed for many months. Then our children were masked. We know a bit about the outcomes now. It's begrudgingly kind of leaked into the public square. There's significant learning deficits that we're still struggling to overcome. Our hospitals and nursing homes were locked. The most vulnerable amongst us were left alone in a time when tremendous fear was being incubated all across our culture. In the face of a pandemic, doctors were sent home. Then there's all these random instructions that were issued as if they were rooted firmly in scientific fact. Cover your face, even if it's with a bandana. Maybe two. Stay 6 feet apart, social distance. Put up plexiglass, because plexiglass is the great destroyer of viruses. And then we saw things that I never imagined we would see: censorship, the taking down of the freedom of speech, censorship from an unholy union of social media and powerful technical companies in our own government. Expressions of authoritarianism that set aside things in our Constitution that we once thought we protected us, very clearly showed us those protections were more an imagination than a reality. And in the background of all those chaotic events and frightening information, we were undergoing an election process. It was just kind of running in the background. And in state after state and circumstance after circumstance, the rule of law was suspended because of pandemic concerns. People were encouraged to vote early and to vote often. Common sense was replaced by fear and propaganda. And ultimately, we witnessed in January 6th what we have been told repeatedly was an insurrection, a murderous attempt to overthrow our duly elected government. It was threatening enough to those in power in the Capitol building that they erected a fence encircling the Capitol building. It's worth noting that they refused to build a fence along our border while they invited invasion of millions of people. The details of that day are still not clear, but upon evaluation, we know this, that the only murder that day was committed by a Capitol police officer in shooting an unarmed woman. The facts have been pretty carefully hidden, while the media has relentlessly recited the propaganda. But it didn't stop. It hasn't stopped. This last October 7th, communities in Israel were attacked by Hamas and citizens from Gaza. Not just terrorists, citizens from Gaza. 1,200 people were brutalized and murdered. More than 200 hostages were taken. Many are still being held, among them American citizens. Across the Muslim world, there were celebrations which took place. In our nation, we've witnessed a rather stubborn reluctance to condemn the event and persistent demonstrations supporting Hamas and their self-declared goal of genocide of the Jewish people. But it doesn't stop. In recent days, we've witnessed an assassination attempt upon a former president and a leading candidate in the current election. Even casual observance suggests the attack was allowed to unfold. There's been little or no transparency from those in charge. Many in the media are now suggesting it was a political stunt and not a real threat. The excuses that have been offered, to be candid, seem farcical. The roof was too slopey. But it's a symptom of a much larger issue. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to do an interview with Robert Kennedy Jr. Some of you will remember that both his father and his uncle were assassinated. So Mr. Kennedy, at some courage on his part and great vulnerability, entered this current election cycle as a candidate and has been consistently denied until just the last few days the protection of the Secret Service. He was told to provide his own security if he wanted to engage in the election. We have a president who has called his chief political rival a target, and the media who repeated the label endlessly. Almost anything you want to pick up or look at, our nation continues to deteriorate at a rate that implies an intentional dismantling. It seems to be far too specific and consistent to be random. We defund our police and turn our military into a social experiment, asserting that preferred pronouns make us safer, or that women and men are equal in physical strength and stamina and therefore should be deployed equally on the front lines of battle. And then we hide things. The 4th of July weekend in Chicago, I just returned from Israel where I was told it was so unsafe. Then I'd traveled with dozens and dozens of people and we'd had a wonderful time. I returned home to a weekend in Chicago where there was 100 shootings. And some of the reports were as many as 20 fatalities. Our cities are unsafe. Violence and homelessness is causing mass relocations. Our justice system has been weaponized, not against those who are committing crimes, but against those we want to keep from power. Our leaders choose to be energy dependent upon nations which are adversarial to our own national interest. Our economy is staggering, almost $35 trillion in debt. It's a number too big for me to understand. Inflation has changed how we live and how we imagine our futures, yet we are told repeatedly by multiple voices that it's transient or it's the result of corporate greed, or we're suffering inflation and our chicken costs more because the super wealthy are not doing their fair share. And in the midst of all of this, for the most part, the church says we don't want to talk about it. Well, I would submit to you we have a spiritual problem. It's far more than anything you can evaluate in the political arena. We have a fundamental spiritual problem. So here's my invitation to you. Let's decide to become a part of the spiritual response. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel. You know the drill. Hit the bell for notifications. If you want to, leave a comment.